You thieves stole our sacred orb from Jin Wei.
You tyrants unjustly imprisoned Wei Jin for 20 long years!
Hey, hello, how do you do? Shady Doorags here. The Great Divide. Team Avatar comes across the Great Divide, the largest canyon in the world. Just as they're about to fly over it, two groups of Earth Kingdom refugees show up and begin bickering about who would get to cross the canyon first. Turns out these two groups, the Zhangs and the Ganjin, have been feuding for the past 100 years and they refuse to travel together. Get it? The Great Divide. It's a big divide like a canyon, but also like a divide between people. Aang decides, or rather Katara decides for Aang, that he should get involved and try to make peace between the two tribes since that's part of the Avatar's job. Ultimately, Aang uses Appa to fly each tribe sick and elderly across the canyon while he, Sokka, and Katara walk with the two groups and help settle their differences. This episode has a reputation of being one of, if not the worst episode of AtLA, and I can hardly say my opinions are going to differ. There is a lot wrong with what happens here. First of all, the plot of the episode doesn't even need to happen. Once again, Katara decides that a minor problem is worth the Boomerang Squad's attention, even though the team is on the clock and they're trying to save the world. Like, she doesn't even care that Aang feels unready to take on a task like this. She just straight up thrusts him into the situation.
Ready to put your peacemaking skills to the test?
I don't know. This is the Avatar. And if you give him a chance, I'm sure he can come up with a compromise that will make everyone happy.
But even if you ignore that, the Aang gang didn't have to cross the canyon. They had already gotten the tribes to agree to share the canyon guide and could have just waited for Appa to come back after he dropped off the others. In fact, how much can Appa carry again? Because the other side of the canyon isn't that far for him to fly. Aang, Sokka, and Katara could have just gone with him. I guess you could say Aang felt the need to solve the problem of the feuding tribes permanently, but that isn't made clear. Everything we see suggests his main goal is to just get through the situation at hand. Some might also say that it's a good thing Team Avatar traveled on foot, because if they hadn't, everyone would have gotten eaten. But except for the tour guide, all those people deserve to die in that canyon. They were told, if you bring food, you are going to die. And they chose to bring food, meaning they chose to put their lives in danger. Yeah, their prejudice is influencing their choices and is driving them to make bad decisions, but that is no excuse.
You guys put our lives in danger because you couldn't go without a snack for a day? You are all awful!
Not to mention, this whole situation causes the canyon guy to give up on his job, meaning all future refugees will have to cross the Great Divide by themselves. Thanks, guys! By the way, there is no plot in this episode. Well, I mean, of course there's a story, but this is the rare episode where absolutely nothing contributes to the show as a whole. Zuko doesn't follow Aang through the Great Divide, the Lord of the Spirits forming the canyon doesn't come into play. The only thing we get is the mention that refugees are headed towards Ba Sing Se, and while that will come back later, we didn't need a foreshadowing of it. That is information we could have learned on the spot and it would have changed nothing. This is 100% a filler episode. You could skip it and miss nothing. In fact, the writers even make that joke later in the series.
Look, it's the Great Divide!
Let's keep flying.
Not as big of a problem, but still there. Sokka and Katara are not at their most likable and actually give in to all the fighting and bickering. That's 3 episodes in a row for anti-Katara, geez. And of course, the massive cherry on top of this awful sundae is the moral. The Aang gang learns that the reason the two groups hate each other is because there was a historical moment that each tribe remembers differently. The Ganjin remembered their ancestor being robbed, while the Zhangs remembered their ancestor being falsely imprisoned. Once Aang hears the stories, he reveals that he was there 100 years ago when it happened, and that history seems to have been rewritten. According to him, the two ancestors were brothers, and they didn't wrong one another, they were just playing a game.
Don't get me wrong, Wei Jin was kind of a slob, and Jin Wei was a little stuffy, but they respected each other's differences enough to share the same playing field.
Well, love him or hate him, Aang is spitting straight fact.
Or you could call it lying.
Nani?
I made the whole thing up.
No.
You did not. That is so wrong.
Katara, what is with that face? Why are you enabling this? That was a horrible thing for Aang to do.
Now where's that custard tart? I'm starving.
And the episode just ends there? No! That's a terrible lesson to teach kids. Also, Aang, you're leaving a situation after doing something horribly wrong without properly facing the repercussions.
I'm ready for the next challenge.
Instead of teaching the hard lesson that it doesn't matter who harmed whom because you are not your ancestors, or that petty revenge doesn't solve anything, or that the past may affect the present but it doesn't necessarily define it, AtLA instead teaches that denying that the past ever happened and lying about it is the better option. Aang is basically fake newsing this whole situation just to spread his personal beliefs. Hey guys, you still have issues about that whole slavery thing? What about what happened to the Native Americans? Well, guess what? It was all just a big misunderstanding. Nobody in history ever did anything wrong. Okay, let me calm down and make myself clear. Yes, lying works in the short term. It gets these people to stop fighting and focus on their current situation. But it ultimately only takes care of the symptom, not the problem. The problem is that the Zhangs and the Ganjin allow offenses like this to define how they should treat people, even after a century has passed. If someone else wrongs them, or shoot, if they find out what actually happened to their ancestors, this hatred mentality just starts back up all over again. You don't solve prejudice by lying, you're just covering it up until there's a new reason to be prejudiced. By the way, I actually fell for this moral when I was a kid. I watched the episode and I said out loud, hey, it worked. Thankfully, my dad was in the room while I was watching it, noticed I was being influenced by the lesson, and set me straight. But you know what's funny? Despite all the things I've been complaining about in this episode, I still like it. While it is pointless filler that won't come back, it still adds interesting things to the lore. While the characters are idiots, they're still entertaining. And while Aang does do something absolutely awful, it's not like his character is destroyed or anything. Even with all its faults, I still think this episode is a lot of fun, and I never feel any overwhelming negative emotions while watching it. This is why a lot of people say that AtLA doesn't really have any bad episodes, because even the ones that are subpar for the show's own quality are still decent when just looking at cartoons in general. That being said, I don't know if I agree that no AtLA episodes are bad. At the very least, I know there exists ones that I personally hate. 3 of them, actually. Which 3 episodes? Well, you're just gonna have to wait and see. All in all, The Great Divide is a useless episode that teaches a horrible lesson, and AtLA as a whole would have been better without it. But I enjoy it nonetheless. This has been Shady Doorags. So long. Farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye.